Blood trickled down Kendrick Wallace's temple as the flight attendant demanded his removal. Just minutes earlier, he'd been seated in first class, legitimately. Now, surrounded by security, the renowned black CEO of Wallace Vision Tech watched the white man who'd stolen his seat smirk victoriously. This flight was about to change everything. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If this kind of injustice makes your blood boil, hit that like button right now and subscribe to stay updated on stories that expose the uncomfortable truths of our society. Now let's rewind to see how a simple airplane seat became the catalyst for a nationwide movement. Kendrick Wallace hadn't always been a name that commanded respect in Silicon Valley boardrooms. At 45, the brilliant black tech CEO of Wallace Vision Tech had climbed a mountain that few people who looked like him had ever scaled. His revolutionary AI security company was now worth billions, but his path to success had been anything but smooth. Growing up in South Chicago, Kendrick learned early that he would need to work twice as hard to get half as far. His single mother, a public school teacher, had instilled in him an unshakable work ethic and a belief that education was his ticket out. That belief carried him through neighborhood violence, underfunded schools, and countless moments of being underestimated. It eventually landed him a scholarship to Harvard Business School, where he graduated at the top of his class. "Your excellence is your resistance," his mother would tell him. It became his life's mantra. After cutting his teeth at several major tech companies, Kendrick identified a gap in the market for AI-driven security systems that could predict threats before they materialized. Wallace Vision Tech was born in his garage, like many Silicon Valley success stories. Unlike many of those stories, however, Kendrick faced constant skepticism from investors who couldn't seem to picture a black man as the face of cutting-edge innovation. Today's flight from Atlanta to San Francisco wasn't just another business trip. Wallace Vision was on the verge of going public, and the meeting with major investors tomorrow could set the valuation at an unprecedented level for a black-owned tech company. The IPO would create generational wealth not just for Kendrick, but for the diverse team he'd built that reflected his commitment to opening doors for others. His assistant, Aisha Cooper, had prepared meticulously for this trip. "You need to fly first class," she had insisted that morning, handing him his boarding pass. "You'll need the space and privacy to review these sensitive documents before tomorrow's meeting." Kendrick had frowned at the first-class ticket. Despite his success, he preferred keeping a low profile. Flashy displays of wealth made him uncomfortable, a remnant of his humble upbringing. "I know that look," Aisha had said, reading his expression. "This isn't about showing off. It's practical. 5 hours in economy trying to review confidential IPO documents with someone peering over your shoulder isn't going to work." Reluctantly, he'd agreed. But Kendrick knew something Aisha didn't fully understand. As one of the few black CEOs in Silicon Valley, every action he took was scrutinized through a different lens. Sitting in first class as a black man still raised eyebrows, even in 2025. The weight of representing his community never lifted from his shoulders. Just last month, at an exclusive San Francisco restaurant, a patron had handed Kendrick his empty glass, mistaking him for a waiter despite his custom-tailored suit. Rather than causing a scene, Kendrick had simply directed the man to an actual server. His dignity in such moments was another form of resistance, though the humiliation always left a mark. That morning before heading to the airport, Kendrick had video called his daughter Zara, now a sophomore at Princeton. Seeing her thriving in the Ivy League environment filled him with pride. Every sacrifice, every slight he'd endured, had been worth it to give her opportunities he'd fought so hard to access. "Knock 'em dead tomorrow, Dad," she'd said. "You built something amazing. Don't let anybody tell you different." As Kendrick navigated the Atlanta airport, he noticed the subtle microaggressions that had become so familiar they were almost invisible. The security agent who checked his ID twice. The way people clutched their bags tighter when he stood nearby in line for coffee. The surprised look from the lounge attendant when he presented his first-class boarding pass. He'd learned to armor himself against these paper cuts to his dignity. Today was too important to let them penetrate. Little did he know that in a few hours, he would face something far more severe than subtle bias. A confrontation was brewing that would test everything he believed about fighting racism through excellence and dignity. Kendrick boarded the plane early, taking advantage of the first-class privilege that Aisha had insisted upon. Flight 1382 to San Francisco was a Boeing 787, and his seat, 3A, offered a window view and ample space to spread out his documents. He needed this time to finalize his strategy for tomorrow's meeting. He settled into the plush leather seat, arranging his workspace with methodical precision. Laptop positioned perfectly on the wide armrest. IPO documents stacked neatly in his leather portfolio. The proprietary algorithm breakdowns that had investors salivating were secured with a special encryption key on his tablet. He had 5 hours to review everything, and he planned to use every minute efficiently. A flight attendant with a warm smile approached. Her name tag read Monica Bailey. "Good morning, sir. Can I offer you a pre-departure beverage?" she asked. "Just water, please," Kendrick replied with a polite nod. He rarely drank alcohol, especially before important business meetings. As Monica served his water, Kendrick noticed her glance at his open laptop screen, which displayed Wallace Vision's impressive quarterly earnings report. A flash of surprise crossed her face, quickly replaced by professional neutrality. It was a reaction he was accustomed to. The momentary cognitive dissonance when people realized the black man in the expensive seat wasn't an athlete or entertainer. The first-class cabin gradually filled with the usual suspects: businessmen in tailored suits, a couple that screamed old money with their understated luxury items, and a few tech types in high-end casual wear. Kendrick returned to his documents, highlighting key points for discussion. Then came the disruption. Gordon Whitley boarded with the entitled air of someone who expected the world to accommodate him. At 58, the white real estate developer had the florid complexion of a man who enjoyed long lunches and the confidence of someone who rarely heard the word no. His bespoke suit probably cost more than what many people made in a month. Gordon stopped abruptly at Kendrick's row, frowning as he checked his boarding pass, and then looked at the seat number above. His eyes narrowed when they landed on Kendrick. "I believe you're in my seat," Gordon stated flatly, no question in his tone. Kendrick looked up calmly from his work. "I don't think so." He reached for his boarding pass in his jacket pocket. "I'm in 3A. Gordon's face tightened. "Well, there must be some mistake because I'm supposed to be in 3A. I always book this seat on this route." Kendrick showed him his boarding pass. "As you can see, I've been assigned 3A. Gordon barely glanced at Kendrick's ticket before pulling out his own. "This is ridiculous. I'm a Platinum Elite member. There's been a mistake." By now, other first-class passengers were watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Kendrick felt the familiar weight of being a spectacle, of having his right to occupy space questioned. "Perhaps you could check with the flight attendant," Kendrick suggested evenly, maintaining his composure while acutely aware of all the eyes on them. Gordon's jaw tightened. "I certainly will." He pressed the call button with unnecessary force. Monica returned quickly, her professional smile firmly in place. "How can I help you?" "There's been a mix-up with the seating," Gordon announced loudly. "I'm supposed to be in 3A. Monica looked between the two men, her smile faltering slightly. "Let me see both of your boarding passes, please." Kendrick handed his over calmly. Gordon thrust his forward impatiently. As Monica examined both documents, Kendrick noticed something troubling. Though both men were similarly dressed in business attire, she addressed Gordon as Mr. Whitley while referring to Kendrick only as Sir. It was a subtle distinction that spoke volumes. "It appears," Monica said after a moment, "that you're actually in 3C, Mr. Whitley." Gordon shook his head dismissively. "That's impossible. I always book 3A. I've been flying this route every month for years." "I understand your frustration, but the system shows that this gentleman has been assigned 3A for today's flight," Monica explained, though her tone carried an apologetic note that suggested she found the situation regrettable. "Check again," Gordon insisted. "There must be a mistake in your system." The confrontation was drawing more attention now. A line was forming in the aisle behind them as other passengers tried to board. Kendrick felt the familiar tension rising in his chest, the one that came whenever he found himself in these situations. He had important work to do, documents that couldn't be viewed by random passengers, and a meeting that required his full preparation. Yet here he was, having to justify his presence in a seat he had legitimately purchased. Perhaps, Gordon suggested with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, we could check who booked their ticket first. Priority should count for something. The implication was clear. Gordon believed he had more right to be there than Kendrick did. The subtext wasn't lost on anyone watching. The seat assignments are final, Monica said, though her tone lacked conviction. Mr. Whitley, your seat is 3C, just across the aisle. Gordon didn't move. Instead, he leaned closer to Monica and lowered his voice, though not enough to prevent Kendrick from hearing. Look, I don't want to make a scene, but I need that specific seat. Surely you can arrange something. The stage was set for a confrontation that would soon escalate beyond what anyone on Flight 1382 could have anticipated. What would you do if someone tried to take what was rightfully yours? Would you stand your ground or choose peace over principle? Comment 1 if you believe Kendrick should hold firm on his assigned seat, or 2 if you think he should move to avoid conflict. Like this video if you've ever witnessed discrimination in a public space, and subscribe to see how this shocking confrontation unfolds. What do you think will happen next? Will anyone stand up for what's right? Monica's body language shifted as she glanced nervously between Gordon and Kendrick. The bias in her response became increasingly evident as she addressed Kendrick. Sir, would you consider moving to another seat in first class? It would solve our problem quickly, she suggested, her voice lowered as though offering a reasonable compromise. Kendrick felt a familiar tightness in his chest. This solution placed the burden of accommodation entirely on him, despite him being in the right. He thought of all the times he'd swallowed his pride and moved, adjusted, or accommodated to avoid being labeled difficult or aggressive. Not today. I appreciate the offer, Kendrick responded firmly but professionally. But I need this specific seat. I have sensitive work documents to review before a critical meeting tomorrow. That's why I booked a window seat with extra privacy. Gordon scoffed audibly. We all have important meetings. I've been booking this exact seat for years. It's practically mine. No seat on a commercial airline is practically yours, Kendrick pointed out reasonably. The assignment is clear on both our boarding passes. Gordon's face flushed red. Look, I don't know who you think you are, but there are people who know their place and people who don't. I've been a loyal customer of this airline for 20 years. The racial undertone of know their place hung in the air like toxic gas. Several nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. One woman in the row behind, who would later identify herself as Vanessa Rodriguez, leaned forward. Excuse me, she interjected, but I couldn't help overhearing. If the gentleman has been assigned 3A on his boarding pass, isn't the matter settled? Monica appeared flustered by this intervention. Ma'am, please, we're handling the situation. It doesn't look handled to me, Vanessa persisted. It looks like you're asking someone to give up a seat that's rightfully theirs. Gordon turned to glare at Vanessa. This doesn't concern you. I think it concerns everyone when basic rules aren't being followed, she replied coolly. Monica pressed the intercom button. I need Bradley to first class, please. Her voice trembled slightly. Within moments, Bradley Thompson, the head flight attendant, arrived. Tall, blonde, and exuding authority. He assessed the situation with a quick glance. What seems to be the problem? He asked, directing his question to Monica rather than either of the men involved. Mr. Whitley feels he should be in 3A, but it's been assigned to this gentleman, Monica explained, gesturing toward Kendrick without using his name. Bradley turned to Gordon first. Mr. Whitley, good to see you again. Let me check your boarding pass. The familiarity was striking. Bradley not only knew Gordon by name, but treated him with deference. After glancing at Gordon's pass, he turned to Kendrick with noticeably less warmth. Sir, your boarding pass? Kendrick provided it for the third time, his patience wearing thin, but his exterior remaining calm. Years of navigating white-dominated spaces had taught him that displaying frustration would immediately be weaponized against him. Bradley barely glanced at Kendrick's boarding pass before handing it back. "I understand your pass says 3A, but Mr. Whitley is one of our most valued Platinum Elite members. Perhaps you wouldn't mind moving to 3E? It's also a window seat." "That's not the issue," Kendrick stated firmly. "My seat assignment is 3A. I selected it specifically for this flight. I'm not being difficult, but I do expect the airline to honor its own seating assignments." Bradley's expression hardened. "Sir, we're trying to accommodate everyone." "By asking only me to move, despite my valid ticket?" Kendrick asked pointedly. Gordon interjected. "This is ridiculous. I've never had this kind of problem before." "That's because no one has stood up to you before," Vanessa muttered, just loud enough to be heard. The tension in the cabin escalated. Other passengers were now openly watching, some recording discreetly with their phones. Kendrick felt trapped in a nightmare scenario. Being reasonable but treated as unreasonable. Being right but treated as wrong. Being professional but about to be labeled as aggressive. "Sir, if you continue to be uncooperative, we'll have to take further steps," Bradley warned, his tone carrying an unmistakable threat. Kendrick took a deep breath. "I'm being perfectly cooperative. I simply expect to sit in the seat I was assigned and paid for. How is that unreasonable?" "The tone you're taking," Bradley began. "My tone?" Kendrick interrupted, though his voice remained measured. "I'm speaking calmly and logically. Please explain what about my tone is problematic." Bradley exchanged glances with Monica. Without another word, he stepped away and picked up the cabin phone. Kendrick knew what was coming next. He'd seen this playbook before, the escalation of a minor issue into a security matter when a black person refused to acquiesce to unreasonable demands. His heart raced, but externally he maintained his composure, aware that any display of emotion would be used against him. He was right to be concerned. The next voice that came over the intercom was the captain's, informing passengers that boarding would be temporarily delayed due to a passenger situation. The humiliation of being the situation was all too familiar. What Kendrick couldn't have anticipated was just how far this incident would escalate, and how it would ultimately transform not just his life, but airline policies nationwide. Captain Leonard Reynolds appeared in the first-class cabin, his weathered face set in a grim expression. At 60, the veteran pilot had navigated countless turbulent situations, but the tension radiating through his premium cabin was of a different nature. "What's the issue here?" he asked, his authoritative voice immediately quieting the murmurs among passengers. Before Kendrick could speak, Gordon stepped forward, his body language projecting victimhood despite being the aggressor. "Captain, I've been trying to resolve this amicably," Gordon said, his voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable. "I'm a Platinum Elite member who flies this route monthly. There's been a mix-up with my usual seat, and this gentleman is refusing to cooperate with the crew's requests to move." The framing was masterful in its manipulation, casting Kendrick as difficult and himself as the reasonable party seeking compromise. "Sir," Captain Reynolds turned to Kendrick, his expression already hardened by Gordon's characterization. "Captain, there's no mix-up," Kendrick began calmly. "My boarding pass clearly assigns me to seat 3A. I've shown it multiple times. I selected this seat specifically because I need to review confidential business documents before a major meeting tomorrow." Gordon interrupted. "We all have important business. Please let him finish," Captain Reynolds said, though his tone suggested he was merely going through the motions of fairness. "Thank you," Kendrick continued. "I've been calm and reasonable throughout this entire interaction. The issue isn't complicated. I'm in my assigned seat. The airline's own system put me here." More passengers were boarding now, creating a traffic jam in the aisle as they witnessed the unfolding drama. The weight of dozens of curious and judgmental gazes pressed on Kendrick. This public spectacle was exactly what he'd spent his life trying to avoid. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately," Kendrick suggested to the captain. "There's nothing to discuss privately," Gordon interjected. "He's making me uncomfortable. I don't feel safe with how aggressive he's being." The word aggressive hung in the air, the loaded term so often used against black men regardless of their actual behavior. Kendrick had been speaking in measured tones throughout the entire encounter, while Gordon had been the one raising his voice. "I haven't raised my voice once," Kendrick pointed out. "I've been professional and calm." Captain Reynolds ignored this fact. "Sir, if you're creating a disturbance—" "The only disturbance," Vanessa Rodriguez interrupted from her seat, "is coming from the man trying to steal a seat that isn't his. I've been watching this whole interaction." Captain Reynolds frowned at Vanessa. "Ma'am, please stay out of this." Gordon leaned toward the captain. "Leonard, you know me. I've flown with you before. I don't want to call Thomas about this, but—" He let the sentence hang unfinished, the implied name dropping of what was presumably an airline executive serving as a veiled threat. The captain's expression shifted subtly. "Let me see if I can sort this out. Mr. Whitley, you're a valued customer. Sir," he turned to Kendrick, "what's your name?" "Kendrick Wallace." "Mr. Wallace, in the interest of getting this flight underway—" "I'm Kendrick Wallace, CEO of Wallace Vision Tech," Kendrick added, hating that he had to invoke his status, but knowing it might be his only leverage. Gordon let out a bark of laughter. "Right, and I'm Elon Musk." The dismissal was immediate and telling. The possibility that Kendrick could be a CEO was, to Gordon, literally laughable. "I can prove my identity," Kendrick said, reaching for his wallet. "That won't be necessary," Captain Reynolds said. "We need to resolve this situation quickly. Security has been called as a precaution." The escalation to security without any actual disruption or threat was the clearest indication yet of the racial dynamics at play. Kendrick had done nothing to warrant security intervention, yet here they were, treating him as a threat based solely on Gordon's characterization and their own biases. 2 airport security officers appeared at the entrance to the first-class cabin. One of them, an older black man whose nameplate read Officer James Harris, made brief eye contact with Kendrick. There was a flash of recognition in his eyes. "What's the situation, Captain?" Officer Harris asked professionally. "We have a seating dispute that's escalated," Captain Reynolds explained. "This gentleman is refusing crew instructions to relocate." Officer Harris turned to Kendrick. "Sir, could I see your boarding pass, please?" For the 4th time, Kendrick produced his boarding pass. Officer Harris examined it carefully, then looked at Gordon's pass as well. "It appears this gentleman is assigned to Seat 3A, Officer Harris stated factually, gesturing to Kendrick. "The issue isn't just about the technical assignment," Bradley interjected. "It's about his refusal to cooperate with crew instructions, which is a violation of aviation regulations." Officer Harris's expression remained neutral, but his eyes conveyed understanding of the situation's true nature. He'd seen this before, the technical rules being twisted to enforce unjust outcomes. "Mr. Wallace," he said quietly, "I believe I saw you speak at the Atlanta Tech Summit last year. Your facial recognition software presentation was impressive." The acknowledgement of Kendrick's identity shifted the energy momentarily, but not enough to change the trajectory of events now in motion. The second security officer, a younger white man, stepped forward. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us to resolve this situation at the gate." "I'm not leaving this seat," Kendrick stated firmly. "I've done nothing wrong." Gordon visibly smirked. The power dynamics were playing out exactly as he'd expected. The system was working in his favor, as it always had. What none of them realized was that this confrontation was about to spiral far beyond the confines of Flight 1382, with consequences that would reverberate throughout the airline industry and corporate America at large. "Sir, please gather your belongings and come with us," the younger security officer instructed Kendrick, his hand hovering near his radio in an unnecessary display of authority. "I respectfully decline," Kendrick responded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "I am in my assigned seat with a valid ticket. I have broken no laws or airline regulations." Officer Harris shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the injustice unfolding but bound by protocol. "Mr. Wallace, if you could come with us temporarily, we can resolve this at the gate and get everything cleared up." "Once I leave this seat, he'll take it," Kendrick pointed out, nodding toward Gordon, who was watching with barely concealed satisfaction. "And then what? I'll be the one stranded at the gate while the flight departs." Bradley stepped forward. "Sir, as head flight attendant, I need to inform you that refusing crew member instructions is a federal offense. We're asking you one final time to deplane voluntarily." The trap was perfectly set. By framing Kendrick's reasonable refusal to give up his rightful seat as refusing crew member instructions, they had manufactured a technical violation that could justify forcible removal. "This is textbook discrimination," Kendrick stated clearly, making sure his words were heard by the passengers recording the incident. "I am being asked to give up my assigned seat to a white passenger simply because he wants it and feels entitled to it." Gordon's face flushed with anger. "Don't make this a race issue. This is about airline loyalty and respect." "It became a race issue the moment you looked at me and decided I didn't belong in this seat," Kendrick replied evenly. Captain Reynolds stepped forward. "That's enough. Security, please remove Mr. Wallace from the aircraft." Vanessa stood up from her seat. "This is wrong. You're all watching this happen and doing nothing." A few other passengers murmured in agreement, but most looked away uncomfortably, unwilling to involve themselves. The younger security officer moved toward Kendrick. "Sir, I need you to stand up now." "I will not," Kendrick stated firmly. "I am peacefully remaining in my assigned seat." What happened next occurred with shocking speed. The security officer grabbed Kendrick's arm, attempting to pull him from the seat. Instinctively, Kendrick pulled back, not fighting but simply resisting being manhandled. "He's resisting," Bradley called out, as though narrating for the benefit of witnesses. Officer Harris tried to intervene. "Wait, let's not escalate." But it was too late. The younger officer, interpreting Kendrick's basic self-protection as resistance, yanked harder. In the confined space of the airplane seat, Kendrick's head struck the overhead compartment with a sickening thud. A small gash opened on his temple, blood immediately trickling down his face. "Oh my God!" Vanessa cried out. "You're hurting him!" Phones throughout the cabin captured the moment. A successful black CEO being bloodied for refusing to surrender his seat to a white man who wanted it. The imagery was as powerful as it was disturbing. Dazed from the impact, Kendrick found himself being pulled to his feet. His expensive suit jacket tore at the shoulder as the officer maintained his grip. Blood dripped onto his white shirt collar, creating a stark visual that would later become iconic in news coverage. "I am not resisting," Kendrick stated loudly and clearly, despite the pain throbbing at his temple. "I am being removed from my rightful seat without cause. I want everyone to witness this." As they marched him toward the exit, Kendrick caught sight of Gordon already sliding into seat 3A, a satisfied expression on his face, the victory of privilege playing out in real time. "This is what racism looks like in America today," Kendrick announced, his voice carrying through the hushed cabin. "Not hooded figures, but systems that protect privilege at the expense of justice." "Get him out of here," Captain Reynolds ordered, visibly uncomfortable with Kendrick's articulate naming of what was occurring. Vanessa and several other passengers stood up in protest. "I'm getting off too," Vanessa declared. "I won't fly with an airline that treats people this way." "Me too," said another passenger, an older white woman who had been watching with increasing distress. But their protests came too late to prevent Kendrick's removal. The walk of shame through the main cabin, blood streaming down his face, was excruciating. Hundreds of eyes watched as he was escorted out like a criminal, despite being the victim. As they reached the jet bridge, Officer Harris whispered, "I'm sorry, Mr. Wallace. This isn't right." Kendrick nodded slightly, his CEO brain already shifting from shock to strategic thinking. This humiliating moment would not be the end of the story. It would be the beginning of something much bigger. "Get me to your supervisor," he told Officer Harris as they entered the terminal. "And I need to make some calls." The wheels of justice might turn slowly, but Kendrick Wallace was about to apply significant pressure to the gears. Have you ever witnessed injustice and felt powerless to stop it? Or have you been the one person who stood up when everyone else looked away? Comment 1. If you believe more passengers should have defended Kendrick. Or 2. If you think most people are too afraid to speak up in such situations. Hit that like button if you admire Kendrick's dignity under pressure, and subscribe to see how he turns this humiliation into a powerful movement. What would you do if you were in Kendrick's position? How far would you go to fight for justice? Blood still trickling from his temple, Kendrick stood in the bustling Atlanta airport terminal, surrounded by curious onlookers. The humiliation of being publicly removed from his rightful seat burned far deeper than the wound on his head. "I need to speak with your highest-ranking supervisor immediately," Kendrick told Officer Harris, his voice controlled despite the rage and indignity churning inside him. "I'll take you to Diane Morris, the terminal operations manager," Officer Harris replied, clearly uncomfortable with his role in what had transpired. As they walked, Kendrick pulled out his phone and made 2 quick calls. The first was to Charles Bennett, the head of his legal team. "Charles, I need you at Atlanta International now. I've just been physically removed from my assigned first-class seat to accommodate a white passenger. Yes, you heard that correctly. I'm bleeding and was publicly humiliated. Get the team ready for a major discrimination suit." The second call was to Aisha. "Contact our PR team immediately. This is going to hit the news. Have them monitor social media for videos of the incident. And reschedule tomorrow's investor meeting. I may not make it to San Francisco today." By the time they reached Diane Morris's office, Kendrick had shifted fully from victim to strategist. The same analytical mind that had built a tech empire was now focused on turning this injustice into accountability. Diane Morris, a middle-aged white woman in a crisp airline uniform, looked up from her desk with an expression that suggested this was just another customer service issue to manage. "Mr. Wallace, I understand there was an incident on Flight 1382, she began, her tone professionally detached. "An incident," Kendrick repeated, touching the still bleeding cut on his temple. "Is that what we're calling racial discrimination and physical assault now?" Morris's expression tightened. "Sir, I wasn't present, so I can't comment on the specifics, but I understand there was a seating dispute that escalated when you refused to comply with crew instructions." "Let me be very clear," Kendrick said, leaning forward. "I was in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass. A white passenger wanted my seat. Your staff chose to accommodate him by removing me by force, resulting in this injury. Those are the facts." "Sir, our flight attendants have authority over seating arrangements." "Save it," Kendrick interrupted. "My legal team is already en route. I'm Kendrick Wallace, CEO of Wallace Vision Tech. Perhaps you've heard of us. We provide security AI systems to half the Fortune 500 companies in America." The name recognition hit. Morris's expression shifted from dismissive to concerned. "Mr. Wallace, I apologize for any misunderstanding. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination, clearly documented by dozens of passenger videos that are probably hitting social media as we speak." As if on cue, Kendrick's phone buzzed with a text from Aisha. "Videos already trending. Justice for Kendrick gaining traction. Major news outlets requesting statements." Morris's phone rang. She answered, listening intently, her face growing increasingly pale. "Yes, sir. He's here with me now." "Yes, I understand the sensitivity. Immediately, sir." She hung up and faced Kendrick with new deference. "Mr. Wallace, our CEO, Richard Phillips, would like to speak with you directly. He's deeply concerned about what's happened." "I'm sure he is," Kendrick replied coolly, "especially now that he realizes who I am and that this incident is going viral." In the terminal, Officer Harris's radio crackled. He listened, then turned to Kendrick with surprise. "They're halting the flight. Captain Reynolds has been instructed to return to the gate. All passengers are being deplaned." This was an extraordinary development. Halting a flight already preparing for takeoff represented significant cost and disruption, a clear sign that airline executives had recognized the magnitude of their mistake. Kendrick's phone rang again. It was Charles Bennett. "Kendrick, I'm 10 minutes out. Don't sign anything or agree to anything. The videos are explosive. CNN is already running the story. Your bloodied face while being dragged off the plane. It's becoming a symbol." As Kendrick ended the call, Diane Morris approached cautiously. "Mr. Wallace, we'd like to offer you our sincere apologies and a private flight to San Francisco as soon as we can arrange it." Kendrick shook his head. "I don't want special treatment. I want accountability. I want the same respect automatically granted to my white counterparts. A private flight doesn't address the systemic issues that allowed this to happen." Morris looked flummoxed by his refusal of what she clearly considered a generous offer. Meanwhile, Kendrick's team had been busy. Another text from Aisha. "Preliminary background check on Gordon Whitley complete. History of complaints about aggressive behavior. 2 previous incidents of demanding seats assigned to others, both minorities. Also, he sits on a charitable foundation with airline board member Thomas Prescott." The connection explained Gordon's confidence in name-dropping Thomas to the captain. The system of privilege operated through these invisible networks of power and influence. Outside the office, a commotion was building. Passengers from Flight 1482 were streaming into the terminal, many of them looking confused and angry about the unexpected deplaning. Vanessa Rodriguez spotted Kendrick through the office window and rushed over. "Mr. Wallace, I've been trying to find you. I recorded everything. It was absolutely appalling how they treated you." "Thank you for speaking up," Kendrick told her sincerely. "Too many people stay silent in these moments." "I couldn't watch it happen," she replied. "And neither could others once they realized what was going on. There's a group of us who've given statements to airport police about what we witnessed." Captain Reynolds appeared at Morris's office door, his authority diminished by the chaotic situation. "Mr. Wallace, I've been instructed to personally apologize for the incident on my aircraft." The apology felt hollow, motivated by corporate damage control rather than genuine remorse. But Kendrick recognized it as a small victory nonetheless. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically in the span of 30 minutes. Security footage from the plane was being reviewed in a nearby office. Officer Harris returned from viewing it, shaking his head. "The video directly contradicts Mr. Whitley's claims about your behavior, Mr. Wallace. He clearly lied about feeling threatened." The pieces were falling into place for a powerful response to this injustice. What had begun as one more indignity in a lifetime of them was transforming into an inflection point, not just for Kendrick personally, but potentially for how corporations handled racial bias. As Richard Phillips, the airline's CEO, was patched through on a video call, Kendrick straightened his torn jacket. The wound on his temple had stopped bleeding but remained a visceral reminder of the physical cost of standing his ground. "Mr. Wallace," Phillips began, his face grave on the screen. "On behalf of the entire airline, I want to express our deepest apologies for the inexcusable treatment you received today." "Apologies are a start," Kendrick replied firmly. "But this isn't about me anymore. This is about ensuring no one else experiences what I did today." The conversation that followed would set the stage for a reckoning that would extend far beyond one flight or one airline, a reckoning that was long overdue in American corporate culture. Inside Flight 1382, Gordon Whitley had barely settled into the first-class seat he'd coveted when the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that this flight is being returned to the gate. All passengers will need to deplane at this time. Please take all personal belongings with you." A chorus of groans and protests erupted throughout the cabin. Gordon's face flushed with indignation. "This is outrageous," he exclaimed to Bradley, who looked equally stunned by the development. "Call Thomas immediately." But Bradley's authority had evaporated. A new flight attendant, sent from airline management, entered the first-class cabin. "Mr. Whitley," she said firmly, "you'll need to gather your belongings and exit the aircraft first." "On what grounds?" Gordon demanded, refusing to move. "Management instructions," she replied coolly. "Security will assist if necessary." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on the other passengers. The same man who had demanded Kendrick's removal now faced removal himself. Several people filmed his reaction, completing the narrative arc that had begun with Kendrick's humiliation. In the terminal, a remarkable scene was unfolding. Captain Leonard Reynolds approached Kendrick, who was now surrounded by his legal team and several airline executives. "Mr. Wallace," the captain said, his weathered face solemn, I owe you a personal apology. I failed in my duty to ensure all passengers on my aircraft were treated fairly and with dignity. The apology seemed genuine, unlike the corporate damage control efforts. Kendrick nodded acknowledgement, understanding that the captain, like many, had been operating within a biased system that he'd never been forced to examine. "I appreciate that, Captain Reynolds," Kendrick replied. "I hope this incident leads to reflection for everyone involved." Nearby, airline executives huddled in crisis mode. Richard Phillips, having flown in by helicopter from the corporate headquarters, was personally overseeing the response. The public relations disaster was growing by the minute, with #Justice for Kendrick trending nationwide and video clips of Kendrick's bloodied removal playing on every major news network. "Mr. Wallace," Phillips said aside, approaching with an entourage of concerned executives, "we'd like to offer you our private corporate jet to San Francisco, along with compensation for this terrible experience." Kendrick exchanged glances with Charles Bennett, his attorney, who gave a subtle nod. "I appreciate the offer of transportation, as I do have an important meeting tomorrow," Kendrick replied. "However, I'm not interested in being quietly placated with VIP treatment. What happened today reflects systemic issues that affect countless passengers who don't have my resources or platform." Phillips nodded gravely. "We understand. We're prepared to make substantive changes to our training and policies." "That's a start," Kendrick said. "But I also want a full investigation into how this happened, including Mr. Whitley's connections to your board member Thomas Prescott and how those relationships might have influenced the crew's decision-making." The mention of Prescott sent a visible shock through the executive team. The hidden networks of privilege were rarely named so explicitly. Meanwhile, the security footage from the plane was being reviewed in detail. Monica and Bradley faced questioning about their handling of the situation. "Why did you escalate to security without verifying the correct seat assignments?" an airline investigator asked Bradley. Mr. Whitley is a known premium customer," Bradley stammered, his previously confident demeanor crumbling under scrutiny. "So you prioritize the comfort of a white premium customer over the rights of a black customer with a valid ticket for that seat?" the investigator pressed. Bradley had no answer that wouldn't incriminate him further. Officer James Harris provided his account to airline investigators and Kendrick's legal team. "Based on my observations, Mr. Wallace was calm and reasonable throughout the encounter. The escalation to physical removal was completely unwarranted." As Gordon finally deplaned, he was met by airline security and corporate representatives. The swagger that had characterized his behavior on the plane was gone, replaced by defensive anger. "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? Who I know?" he blustered. "Yes, Mr. Whitley, we're very aware of your connections," said the airline's chief compliance officer, a black woman who had been dispatched from headquarters. "That's precisely part of what we're investigating." Kendrick observed this exchange from a distance, feeling no satisfaction in Gordon's discomfort, only a grim determination that this incident should lead to meaningful change. Charles Bennett approached with an update. "The social media response is overwhelming. People are sharing their own stories of discrimination on flights using the hashtag. Major civil rights organizations have issued statements of support. This is becoming a watershed moment." Kendrick nodded thoughtfully. His tech CEO brain was already formulating a strategic approach to leverage this painful experience into lasting impact. "Here's what we're going to do," he told his team. "We'll pursue legal action, not primarily for financial compensation, but with specific demands for systemic changes. I want independent oversight of new anti-bias training. I want transparent reporting of discrimination complaints. And I want accountability for everyone involved in today's incident." As the airline scrambled to contain the PR disaster, Kendrick stepped away to clean the dried blood from his face in a private bathroom. Looking at his reflection, he thought about all the times he'd swallowed smaller indignities to keep the peace. Perhaps his most powerful act of resistance wasn't building a successful company, but refusing to surrender his dignity in this moment, regardless of the cost. When he emerged, Vanessa Rodriguez was waiting with several other passengers who had witnessed the incident. "Mr. Wallace, we've all given statements, but we want you to know we're willing to testify if needed," What happened to you was wrong, and we won't be silent about it. This solidarity, across racial lines, felt like a small but significant shift. Change happened when good people refused to look away from injustice. As night fell, Kendrick finally boarded the corporate jet to San Francisco, his legal team and Aisha accompanying him. The investor meeting tomorrow would proceed as planned, with the added gravitas of a CEO who had just demonstrated to the world that he would stand firm on principle, even at personal cost. The reckoning had begun, not just for one airline or one entitled passenger, but for a system that had operated unchallenged for too long. The emergency airline board meeting convened at midnight, with members joining virtually from across the country. The urgency reflected the severity of the crisis unfolding on social media and news outlets nationwide. The videos have been viewed over 20 million times, the head of communications reported grimly. Every major network is leading with the story. Justice for Kendrick has generated more engagement than any airline-related hashtag in history. Thomas Prescott, the board member with connections to Gordon Whitley, looked particularly uncomfortable as the boardroom's attention turned to him. "Thomas, we need to address the allegations that your relationship with Mr. Whitley influenced how this situation was handled," the board chair stated directly. "Gordon and I serve on the same charitable foundation, that's all," Prescott protested weakly. "I had no knowledge of this incident until after it occurred." "Nevertheless, the perception of favoritism is damaging," the chair responded. "We need complete transparency going forward." As the board grappled with the crisis, Kendrick's flight landed in San Francisco. Despite the late hour and the trauma of the day, he participated in a carefully planned interview with a national news outlet. Poised and articulate even with a visible wound on his temple, he transformed his personal humiliation into a powerful testimony. "What happened to me today happens to Black Americans in different forms every day," he explained. "The difference is that I have the resources and platform to demand accountability. Many don't. This isn't about one seat on one flight. It's about the right to exist in spaces without having our presence questioned or our humanity diminished." The interview struck a chord nationwide. By morning, the story had transcended a simple airline incident to become a conversation about privilege, power, and accountability in corporate America. Meanwhile, other victims of Gordon Whitley's entitlement began coming forward. A flight attendant on another airline revealed that he had gotten her reprimanded after she refused to move another passenger from his preferred seat. A hotel concierge shared a story of Whitley demanding a room occupied by a Latino family be given to him instead. The pattern was clear. Gordon Whitley had spent a lifetime leveraging his wealth, connections, and whiteness to take what he wanted without consequence. Until now. As Kendrick prepared for his investor meeting, news arrived that the airline had placed Monica and Bradley on administrative leave pending investigation. Captain Reynolds had requested temporary reassignment to non-flying duties while he undertook voluntary bias training, a move that suggested genuine reflection rather than mere damage control. The airline's official response came in a press conference where CEO Richard Phillips announced a series of changes. "Effective immediately, we are implementing comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, creating an independent review board for discrimination complaints, and establishing clear protocols for seating disputes that ensure objectivity. We acknowledge that we failed Mr. Wallace, and through him we failed all our customers who trust us to treat them with dignity and respect." The announcement included a significant financial settlement to a foundation of Kendrick's choosing rather than personal compensation, his specific request. The funds would establish scholarships for minority students pursuing careers in aviation and technology. Gordon Whitley's life was unraveling in parallel. His real estate development company's board called an emergency meeting as clients began distancing themselves from the toxic association. The viral videos had made him the face of entitled privilege, a liability in an era of heightened social consciousness. "Gordon, we're placing you on administrative leave," the board chair informed him. "Your actions reflect poorly on this company's values." "This is absurd," Gordon protested. "It was just a seat." "No, Gordon," responded the only black board member. "It was never just about a seat. It was about you believing your comfort matters more than another person's dignity. We can't have that representing our company." For Kendrick, the investor meeting proceeded better than he could have imagined. The incident, far from distracting from Wallace Vision's business prospects, had highlighted his integrity and principles, qualities investors valued in a leader. "What you demonstrated yesterday wasn't just personal courage," the lead investor told him, "but the kind of ethical leadership that builds sustainable companies. We're increasing our investment commitment by 20%. As the day concluded, Kendrick received word that the airline had formally banned Gordon Whitley from future travel on their carriers, an unprecedented step that signaled the seriousness with which they were approaching reform. But the most meaningful moment came when Kendrick received a call from a group of black pilots and flight attendants from the airline. "What you did created space for us to finally speak up about what we've experienced and witnessed," their spokesperson told him. "The company is listening to us now in ways they never have before. You turned your humiliation into a catalyst for change that will benefit countless travelers and employees." That evening, Kendrick called his daughter Zara at Princeton. "Dad, I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You always taught me to stand my ground with dignity, but watching you actually do it, when it would have been easier to give in, that's a lesson I'll never forget." As Kendrick prepared to sleep, physically and emotionally exhausted from the whirlwind of the past 36 hours, he reflected on how a simple refusal to surrender his seat had cascaded into something far more significant than he could have imagined. Sometimes, standing your ground was about more than personal dignity. It was about shifting the ground itself for everyone who would follow. 1 month after the incident that came to be known simply as Flight 1382, Kendrick Wallace stood before a congressional committee on corporate discrimination. The hearing room was packed with media, civil rights leaders, and airline industry representatives. "Mr. Wallace," the committee chair began, "your experience has catalyzed a national conversation about how corporations handle racial bias. Could you share your perspective on what needs to change?" Kendrick leaned toward the microphone, his composed demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos of that day on the plane. "What happened to me was not exceptional," he stated clearly. "What was exceptional was that it was documented, that I had the resources to fight back, and that people chose to pay attention. For meaningful change, we need systems that protect everyone's dignity, not just those with power, platforms, or privilege." His testimony laid out concrete recommendations for accountability measures across service industries. The hearing represented just one of many ripple effects from Flight 1382 that were transforming corporate practices nationwide. The airline industry had been the first to implement sweeping changes. New federal guidelines required airlines to track and report incidents of passenger discrimination. Bias training became mandatory for flight crews, with programs designed by diversity experts rather than corporate HR departments. Seating dispute protocols were standardized to eliminate subjective decision-making. For Kendrick personally, the aftermath had been transformative in unexpected ways. Wallace Vision Tech's IPO had exceeded all projections, with the company's valuation increased by the positive publicity surrounding Kendrick's principled stand. Investors viewed his handling of the incident as evidence of the character and judgment they wanted in a corporate leader. "Integrity isn't just a personal virtue," one major investor told CNBC. "It's a business asset." Wallace demonstrated the kind of leadership that builds 100-year companies. With his new resources and elevated platform, Kendrick established the Flight 1382 Foundation, dedicated to supporting Black entrepreneurs in tech and transportation. The name reclaimed what could have been merely a humiliating experience, transforming it into a force for positive change. Vanessa Rodriguez, the passenger who had spoken up on his behalf, became a key partner in the foundation's work. Her background in education and diversity training made her the perfect choice to lead its professional development programs. "Sometimes the universe puts you in exactly the right place at the exact right moment," she told Kendrick when they reunited to launch the foundation. "I'm just glad I didn't stay silent when it mattered." Gordon Whitley's trajectory had moved in the opposite direction. Removed from leadership at his company and facing multiple lawsuits from others who had experienced his entitlement and discrimination, he had become a reluctant case study in the consequences of unchecked privilege. In a surprising development, the airline that had been the site of the incident emerged as an industry leader in inclusive practices. Under new diversity leadership, they implemented a revolutionary training program designed by Kendrick's team. The program focused not just on avoiding discrimination, but on creating actively inclusive environments. Captain Leonard Reynolds, who had initially supported Kendrick's removal, became an unexpected advocate for change. After undergoing extensive reflection and training, he now led workshops for other pilots on recognizing and interrupting bias in real-time decision-making. "I failed as a captain that day," he admitted candidly in training sessions. "I allowed an unjust situation to escalate because I didn't recognize my own biases. That failure changed how I understand my responsibilities." Monica and Bradley, the flight attendants who had facilitated Kendrick's removal, faced different outcomes. Monica, after genuine contrition and commitment to change, was reinstated with probationary status. Bradley, who had shown little remorse, was ultimately terminated when investigation revealed a pattern of biased treatment toward minority passengers. Perhaps most meaningful to Kendrick was the impact on his daughter Zara. Inspired by her father's experience, she established an internship program at Princeton for minority students interested in aviation and technology fields. "My dad always taught me that excellence was important, but I learned from watching him that courage is equally essential," she told her university newspaper. The program is about creating opportunities, but also about building the confidence to stand firm when faced with injustice. On the anniversary of the incident, Kendrick found himself boarding another flight from Atlanta to San Francisco. The experience couldn't have been more different. The crew, trained under the new protocols his team had helped develop, treated every passenger with equal respect and dignity. As he settled into his seat, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to have Kendrick Wallace on our flight today. 1 year ago, a deeply unfortunate incident on this very route became a catalyst for positive change throughout our industry. We're committed to ensuring that every passenger is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve." The spontaneous applause that erupted throughout the cabin brought unexpected tears to Kendrick's eyes. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Your excellence is your resistance." But he had learned something equally important. Sometimes standing your ground could shift the ground itself, creating space for others to stand tall as well. As the plane ascended into the clear blue sky, Kendrick reflected on how a moment of injustice had been transformed into a movement for accountability. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Not just for him, but for everyone who would travel these skies in the future. What do you think about Kendrick's journey from humiliation to creating meaningful change? Has his story inspired you to stand up against injustice when you see it? Comment below with a time when you spoke up or wish you had spoken up when witnessing unfair treatment. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one person's courage can create ripples of change throughout society. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes our most difficult moments become our most important contributions to making the world more just. Kendrick Wallace's experience on Flight 1382 teaches us powerful lessons about courage, dignity, and systemic change. First, standing your ground against injustice isn't just about personal dignity. It can create ripple effects that benefit countless others. Second, privilege often operates through invisible networks that go unchallenged until someone refuses to accept the status quo. Third, true change requires both individual courage and institutional accountability. Kendrick's refusal to surrender his rightful seat wasn't stubbornness. It was a principled stand against a lifetime of accommodating bias. His story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful resistance isn't loud protest, but simply refusing to participate in your own marginalization. The transformation from victim to catalyst demonstrates how painful experiences can become platforms for meaningful change when channeled strategically. By focusing on systemic solutions rather than personal compensation, Kendrick ensured his individual trauma served a greater purpose. Perhaps most importantly, the story shows that change happens when those with privilege recognize injustice and use their voices to support those directly affected. Vanessa's willingness to speak up reminds us that being an ally means acting when it matters, not just expressing sympathy afterward. What moment in your life required you to stand firm on principle, even when it would have been easier to give in? Share your story in the comments below. Has racism or discrimination touched your life or someone you know? Your experiences matter in this ongoing conversation about justice and dignity. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button to support more content that highlights these crucial social issues. Give this video a thumbs up if you believe in standing up against injustice wherever you encounter it. Share it with someone who needs encouragement to hold their ground when facing unfair treatment. Thank you for being part of this important conversation. Remember, sometimes our greatest contribution to making the world more just comes from refusing to accept injustice, even in seemingly small moments.